He thought he was helping a stranger escape the rain. But before the night was over, that single act of kindness would challenge everything Damien Vaughn believed about fate. Rain hammered against the streets of Manhattan with relentless force, turning sidewalks into shimmering rivers of reflected light. Yellow taxicabs crawled through traffic. Umbrellas collided at crowded intersections. Most people moved with their heads down, focused only on reaching shelter as quickly as possible. Damien Vaughn sat in the back of a black luxury sedan, watching the storm through tinted windows. At 35, he had built a reputation for being a man who controlled every detail of his life. His schedule was planned weeks in advance. His decisions were calculated. His emotions remained locked behind walls few people ever managed to reach. Tonight was supposed to be no different. The blind date waiting for him downtown had been arranged by his family after months of pressure. According to them, it was time for him to settle down. Time to stop treating relationships like business transactions. Time to think about a future beyond work and responsibility. Damien disagreed with all of it. He glanced at his watch. 7:23 p.m. The reservation was for 8. Plenty of time. His phone buzzed again. Another text from his mother. Another reminder not to be late. Another attempt to convince him that this woman was different. Damien slid the phone back into his pocket without responding. Outside, thunder rolled across the city skyline. Then something unusual caught his attention. Near a bus stop, half a block ahead stood a young woman completely alone. She wasn't hiding inside a storefront. She wasn't trying to wave down a cab. She simply stood beneath a damaged shelter that barely protected her from the downpour. Rain soaked through her dark coat. Water dripped from tightly curled hair gathered loosely behind her head. A worn canvas bag rested against her shoulder. People rushed past without looking twice. Some glanced briefly before continuing on their way. The city had taught everyone the same lesson. Keep moving. Mind your business. Survive your own problems first. Yet, something about her made Damien continue watching. Perhaps it was the way she stood. Despite being drenched, she wasn't defeated. Despite clearly struggling, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her posture remained straight. Her expression calm. She looked less like someone waiting for rescue and more like someone refusing to surrender to circumstances. The sedan approached the intersection. Damien could have ignored her. Most people would have. Instead, he heard himself speak. Pull over. The driver looked surprised but obeyed immediately. The vehicle eased to the curb. Damien opened the door and stepped into the cold rain. Water immediately struck the shoulders of his tailored charcoal overcoat. The woman noticed him approaching and instinctively tightened her grip on her bag. Caution flickered across her face. Understandable caution. New York wasn't a city where strangers trusted easily. Damien stopped a respectful distance away. Without saying a word, he extended the large umbrella he carried. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rain filled the silence between them. Then her dark brown eyes lifted to meet his. Intelligent eyes. Tired eyes. Eyes carrying burdens she had learned not to discuss. You don't have to do that, she said softly. Damien studied her for a second. Most people would have accepted immediately. Most people would have thanked him before he even finished the gesture. But not her. And somehow, that made him even more curious. What Damien Vaughn didn't realize was that this brief encounter beneath a storm-darkened sky was not an interruption to his evening. It was the beginning of a story neither of them saw coming. Janelle Brooks looked at the umbrella for another second before finally shaking her head. Rainwater slid from the edge of her coat and splashed onto the sidewalk below. I appreciate it, she said, her voice calm despite the weather. But you should not stand out here because of me. Damien almost smiled. Most people would have stepped under the umbrella immediately. Most people would have welcomed the comfort without hesitation. Yet this woman seemed more concerned about inconveniencing a stranger than protecting herself. From a storm. I will survive a little rain, he replied. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. For a brief moment, the tension between them softened. Around them, New York continued moving at its usual pace. Headlights blurred through sheets of rain. Sirens echoed somewhere in the distance. A delivery truck rolled through an intersection, sending water across the curb. Still, neither of them seemed in a hurry to end the conversation. You have been standing here a while? Damien asked. About 40 minutes. His eyebrows lifted. Waiting for a bus. Waiting for the storm to slow down. Her answer was simple. Honest. Damien noticed the worn canvas bag hanging from her shoulder. The fabric was faded. One of the straps had been carefully stitched by hand. Whoever carried it took care of things instead of replacing them. That detail stayed with him for reasons he could not explain. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. Janelle laughed softly. The sound surprised him. It carried warmth despite the cold evening air. "You really do not know how New York works, do you?" Damien looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" A woman does not usually accept rides from strangers standing in the rain. This time he allowed himself a small smile. "Fair point." Her eyes narrowed slightly as if studying him for the first time. His expensive coat. His polished shoes. The luxury sedan waiting nearby. Most people would have made assumptions immediately. Janelle did not seem interested in doing that. "You should get going," she said. "Someone is probably waiting for you." The statement landed more heavily than she realized. Damien glanced briefly toward the waiting car. Someone was waiting. A woman he had never met. A dinner he did not want. A future everyone else seemed eager to design for him. "Maybe," he answered. "Maybe not." Janelle looked away toward the street. "Whoever it is, do not keep them waiting too long." There was something thoughtful in her tone. Something that suggested she understood responsibility better than most people. Another gust of wind swept rain beneath the shelter. Without thinking, Damien moved the umbrella slightly closer to her side. She noticed the gesture immediately. Not dramatic, not performative, just considerate. For reasons neither could explain, the moment felt strangely personal. Then a bus appeared through the storm, headlights cutting across the darkness. Janelle exhaled with visible relief. "Looks like my ride finally showed up." She adjusted her bag and stepped forward. Damien found himself unexpectedly disappointed. The conversation had lasted only a few minutes, yet it felt unfinished somehow. Janelle paused before boarding. "Thank you for the umbrella," she said, "and for stopping." Then she climbed the steps and disappeared inside. The doors closed. The bus pulled away into the rain. Damien remained standing on the sidewalk long after it was gone. He had somewhere important to be. Yet as he returned to the sedan, he realized he could not remember a single detail about the woman waiting for him at dinner. All he could think about was the stranger who had just disappeared into the storm. The restaurant occupied the top floor of a glass tower overlooking Midtown, a place where every table offered a view worth more than most monthly paychecks. Warm golden light reflected from crystal glasses. Soft piano music drifted through the room. Everything about the evening had been designed to impress. Damien Vaughn felt none of it. He arrived exactly on time, removed his rain-speckled coat, and took his reserved seat near the window. The hostess informed him that his guest had not yet arrived. He nodded without concern. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Outside, rain continued to fall across the city skyline. Damien checked his watch. 8:23. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his mother. He answered before the call could ring twice. "She is not here," he said calmly. Silence followed. Then disappointment. Then confusion. Apparently, the woman had not answered her phone for hours. Nobody knew where she was. Nobody knew if she planned to come at all. Damien listened politely before ending the call. To his surprise, he felt relief rather than frustration. The blind date had never been his idea. He should have been grateful for the unexpected escape. Yet instead of enjoying the freedom, his thoughts kept returning to the woman at the bus stop. Janelle. He did not even know her last name. He barely knew anything about her. Still, her image lingered in his mind with unusual persistence. The quiet confidence in her voice. The way she refused help she did not absolutely need. The dignity she carried despite standing alone in a storm. Damien looked out across the restaurant. Around him, people laughed over expensive dinners and celebrated milestones. He had spent years mastering business negotiations, solving complex problems, and reading people within seconds. Yet tonight he could not understand why a conversation lasting less than 10 minutes had unsettled him more than meetings lasting entire days. "Sir, would you like to order?" a server asked politely. Damien glanced at the menu without seeing any of the words. "Not yet." The server nodded and stepped away. 20 minutes later, another call arrived from his mother. The date had officially been canceled. The woman's family was equally confused. Something unexpected had happened, but details were unclear. Damien listened quietly before placing the phone face down on the table. Strange. Most men would have considered the evening finished. Instead, a question continued bothering him. Had Janelle made it home safely? The concern felt irrational, yet it remained. He remembered the exhaustion hidden behind her eyes, the patched canvas bag, the way she had stood in the rain alone. People carried burdens invisible to everyone else. Damien knew that better than most. For a moment, he considered leaving. Then movement near the entrance caught his attention. A young woman entered wearing a black uniform and carrying a serving tray. Rain had dampened the edges of her hair despite her attempt to dry off. She moved quickly toward the dining area, apologizing to a manager for being late. Damien froze. It was her, Janelle, the stranger from the storm. And judging by the surprise that crossed her face when she noticed him sitting by the window, she had not expected to see him again either. Janelle stopped for only a fraction of a second before. Professionalism returned to her face. Years of working customer service had taught her how to recover quickly from surprise. She adjusted her serving tray, offered a polite nod, and continued toward the dining room as if nothing unusual had happened. Damien watched her disappear between tables. Yet something about that brief reaction stayed with him. She had been surprised to see him. Not impressed. Not intimidated. Simply surprised. It was a response he rarely encountered. Most people reacted to him in predictable ways. They either wanted something from him or feared disappointing him. Janelle seemed to fit into neither category. A manager hurried toward her near the service station. Although Damien could not hear every word, he caught enough to understand the situation. She was apologizing for being late. The manager appeared concerned at first, but whatever explanation she offered caused his expression to soften. After a brief conversation, she immediately got to work. No complaints. No excuses. Just action. 20 minutes passed. Damien found himself paying more attention to her than to anything else in the restaurant. Janelle moved efficiently through the dining room, balancing multiple responsibilities at once. She delivered meals, refilled glasses, answered questions, and somehow managed to make every guest feel acknowledged. There was a quiet competence in everything she did. Even when customers barely looked at her, she treated them with patience and respect. Then something happened that caught Damien's attention even more. An elderly woman seated alone near the corner struggled to open a small medication container. Most servers would have continued walking. The dining room was busy. Time mattered. Yet Janelle immediately knelt beside the table and helped her without hesitation. The interaction lasted less than a minute. The elderly woman smiled gratefully. Janelle smiled back before returning to work. No audience. No recognition. No expectation of reward. Just kindness. Damien leaned back in his chair. The image reminded him of something. The same quality he had noticed beneath the bus shelter. The same instinct to think about others before herself. It was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss her as simply another stranger. An hour later, as the dinner crowd began to thin, Janelle finally approached his table. Her expression remained professional, though he detected a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I did not expect to see you again tonight," she admitted. "Neither did I," Damien replied. "Small city." She laughed softly. Nobody has ever called New York a small city. For the first time that evening, the conversation felt natural. Easy. Janelle glanced toward the empty chair across from him. "Your date never showed up?" Damien raised an eyebrow. "You noticed?" An untouched place setting for two is not exactly difficult to notice. There was no judgment in her voice. Only observation. "No," Damien said. "She never came." Janelle looked genuinely sympathetic. "I am sorry." The response surprised him. Most people would have joked about it. She did not. "You had a rough night yourself," he said. "You arrived soaked." Her smile faded slightly. "My grandmother was not feeling well. I had to make sure she was settled before leaving." The answer was brief, but Damien sensed there was far more behind it than she was willing to share. Before he could ask another question, someone called her name from across the room. Responsibility pulled her away once again. As she turned to leave, Damien realized something unexpected. For the first time in months, he was genuinely interested in getting to know someone. And that realization unsettled him far more than a canceled blind date ever could. Janelle finished her shift close to midnight. By then, most of the guests had gone home, and the restaurant had fallen into the quiet rhythm of closing procedures. Chairs were being stacked, tables wiped down. The skyline beyond the glass windows shimmered beneath fading rain clouds. Damien remained longer than he normally would have. Not because he was hungry, not because he had nowhere else to be. He simply found himself reluctant to leave. From across the room, he watched Janelle help another server carry supplies to the kitchen. He noticed how she thanked the dishwasher before leaving. He noticed how she wished every employee a good night by name. Small details, easy details to miss. Yet they revealed something important. Respect seemed to come naturally to her. Not the kind offered for advantage or recognition. Genuine respect. The kind that reflected character when nobody was paying attention. As Janelle stepped outside the restaurant entrance, she paused beneath the awning and checked her phone. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Then she began walking toward the subway station several blocks away. Damien stood near the lobby windows watching her disappear into the night. Most people would have forgotten about the encounter and moved on. Damien tried. He truly did. Yet over the following days, her image continued returning unexpectedly. During meetings, during dinners, during quiet moments between responsibilities. The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. He barely knew her. And still, something about her refused to leave his mind. 3 days later, fate placed them in the same path again. Damien had spent the afternoon reviewing contracts downtown. On his way back, traffic slowed near a community care center located between two older brick buildings. Through the passenger window, he noticed a familiar figure emerging from the entrance carrying grocery bags. Janelle. She looked exhausted. Yet she was smiling while speaking to an elderly woman beside her. The woman moved slowly, leaning on a cane. Janelle matched her pace without impatience, adjusting the grocery bags so the older woman would not have to carry anything herself. Damien watched as they reached a bench. The elderly woman sat down carefully. Janelle knelt beside her and adjusted a blanket around her shoulders. The gesture lasted only seconds, but it revealed more than any conversation could. There was affection there, responsibility, love expressed through simple actions. Damien remained silent as the car moved forward. For reasons he could not explain, seeing that moment affected him more deeply than it should have. Later that evening, curiosity finally overcame restraint. He asked one of his trusted assistants to learn more about the care center. Nothing intrusive, nothing excessive, just enough to understand why Janelle spent time there. The answer arrived the next morning. She volunteered several afternoons each week. Not for pay, not for recognition. She helped elderly residents with errands, transportation, and daily tasks. The report included no dramatic details, no extraordinary achievements, just consistent acts of service repeated week after week. Damien stared at the information longer than necessary. In a world where many people talked about kindness, Janelle quietly practiced it. That realization lingered throughout the day. And for the first time, Damien Vaughn began wondering whether the woman he met in the rain was not merely crossing his path by coincidence. Perhaps she was becoming part of a story neither of them understood yet. For nearly 2 weeks, Damien found reasons to pass through parts of the city he normally never visited. Sometimes he told himself it was coincidence. Other times he admitted the truth. He hoped to see Janelle again. The strange part was not that he thought about her. The strange part was how naturally she had become part of his routine. On Tuesday afternoon, he stopped near the community care center and noticed the bench where he had seen her sitting with the elderly woman. It was empty. On Wednesday evening, he visited the restaurant where she worked. Another server informed him she was not scheduled that night. On Thursday, he drove past the building again. Still no sign of her. Damien told himself not to overthink it. People had lives. Schedules changed. Responsibilities shifted. Yet an uncomfortable feeling settled in the back of his mind. By the following Monday, the feeling had grown stronger. During an important meeting, he caught himself checking his phone repeatedly. During dinner, he found himself staring out a window instead of listening to the conversation around him. Even his closest associates noticed the difference. Damien Vaughn was rarely distracted. Now he seemed distant, preoccupied, as if part of his attention was somewhere else entirely. Then another week passed. Janelle remained absent. The restaurant manager eventually revealed only that she had taken unexpected time away from work. He did not offer details. Damien did not press. Something about her made him respect boundaries he normally would have crossed without hesitation. Still, concern continued growing. One rainy evening, he found himself standing outside the community care center again. The building lights glowed softly through the darkness. Residents moved slowly behind large windows. A familiar receptionist sat at the front desk. Damien entered and introduced himself politely. The woman recognized him immediately. not because of his name, but because she had seen him driving past several times. Her expression softened. "You are looking for Janelle, aren't you?" she asked gently. Damien hesitated before nodding. The receptionist sighed. "She has not been here in over a week." The answer tightened something in his chest. "Is she all right?" The woman looked down for a moment. "I honestly do not know." Those 5 words hit harder than they should have. Damien thanked her and stepped back into the night. Rain drifted through the city once again, softer than the storm that had first brought them together. He stood beneath a street lamp and realized something he had been avoiding for days. He was worried. Not casually curious. Not mildly interested. Genuinely worried. Janelle had entered his life unexpectedly and somehow become important before he even understood how it happened. The realization unsettled him. It also clarified everything. This was no longer about curiosity. It was no longer about coincidence. Somewhere in New York, a woman who spent her days helping others was carrying a burden she could not manage alone. And for the first time in years, Damien Vaughn felt completely powerless. He knew how to solve business problems. He knew how to manage complicated situations. But standing alone beneath the rain, unable to find the one person he wanted to see, he faced something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. And deep down, he feared that whatever had caused Janelle to disappear was far more serious than anyone realized. The answer arrived on a gray Thursday morning when Damien least expected it. He had just finished reviewing reports in his office when his phone rang. The caller was the receptionist from the community care center. Her voice carried the hesitation of someone unsure whether she was crossing a line. "I thought you should know," she said carefully. "I saw Janelle yesterday." Damien sat upright immediately. "Is she okay?" A pause followed. "She was at St. Catherine Medical Center." The words settled heavily in the room. 30 minutes later, Damien found himself walking through the hospital lobby. Bright lights reflected off polished floors. Nurses moved quickly between departments. Families sat quietly in waiting areas, holding cups of coffee and fragile hopes. It was a world far removed from boardrooms and luxury restaurants. A world where money could make things easier, but could not erase fear. Damien approached the information desk and asked a simple question. He expected resistance. Instead, a volunteer pointed him toward a family waiting area on the 4th floor. As the elevator climbed, an unfamiliar feeling tightened his chest. He did not know what he would find. He only knew he needed to see her. When the elevator doors opened, he spotted her almost immediately. Janelle sat alone near a window overlooking the city. Her shoulders were slumped with exhaustion. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. The confident energy he remembered seemed worn thin by sleepless nights and constant worry. A paper cup of untouched coffee sat beside her. She stared through the glass without seeing the skyline beyond it. For a moment, Damien simply stood there. The sight of her affected him more than he expected. Not because she looked different, but because she looked human in the most vulnerable way possible. The woman who spent so much time caring for everyone else had reached the edge of her own strength. Janelle noticed him only when he stepped closer. Her eyes widened with surprise. "Damien," she asked softly, as if uncertain he was real. "I have been looking for you," he admitted. A tired smile appeared briefly before fading again. "I am sorry. Everything happened so fast." Damien sat beside her. Neither spoke for several seconds. The silence felt natural rather than uncomfortable. Finally, he glanced toward the hallway leading deeper. "Into the hospital. Your grandmother?" Janelle nodded. 3 weeks ago, she started feeling worse. Then she collapsed at home. Her voice remained steady, but the exhaustion behind it was impossible to miss. "The doctors are helping her, but there are still a lot of questions." She looked down at her hands. "I stopped working. I stopped volunteering. I have spent almost every day here." Damien listened quietly. There was no self-pity in her words. No complaints. Just facts delivered by someone carrying more than she should have to carry alone. "You should not have to do all of this by yourself," he said. Janelle laughed softly, though there was sadness behind the sound. "Life does not always give us a choice." Damien looked at her for a long moment. In that instant, he understood something that had been growing inside him for weeks. His concern was no longer curiosity. It was no longer admiration from a distance. Seeing her struggle hurt in a way he could not easily explain. And for perhaps the first time in his life, Damien Vaughn wished he could take away someone else's burden, even if only for a moment. The days that followed settled into a quiet routine neither of them had expected. Damien visited the hospital whenever his schedule allowed. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he brought meals that Janelle inevitably forgot to eat. Most of the time, he simply sat beside her in silence. To his surprise, those silent moments became the part of his day he valued most. One afternoon, nearly a month after the night they first met, a doctor finally delivered encouraging news. Janelle's grandmother was stable. Recovery would take time, but the immediate danger had passed. Relief washed across Janelle's face so suddenly that tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She quickly looked away, embarrassed by the emotion. Damien pretended not to notice. Instead, he handed her a tissue without saying a word. That small act earned a genuine smile, the first one he had seen from her in weeks. Later that evening, while Janelle sat with her grandmother, Damien stepped into the hospital cafeteria to answer several calls. When he returned to the waiting area, he noticed a folder resting on one of the chairs. It had apparently slipped from Janelle's bag. He picked it up, intending only to keep it from falling onto the floor. Then a single sheet partially slid from the folder. A familiar date immediately caught his attention. His eyes narrowed. The document appeared to be part of a correspondence package from several weeks earlier. He had no intention of invading her privacy. Yet before he could look away, another detail stopped him completely. The name, Janelle Brooks. Beneath it appeared information connected to a professional matchmaking service. Damien felt the air leave his lungs. Slowly, he pulled the page free enough to read the appointment details. The scheduled meeting date matched exactly. The restaurant location matched exactly. Even the reservation time matched exactly. For several seconds, he simply stared. Then the truth settled over him with breathtaking clarity. The woman his family had arranged for him to meet that rainy night had never been a stranger. It had been Janelle all along. The blind date that never happened. The empty chair across from him. The unexplained cancellation. The storm. Every piece suddenly connected. Damien lowered himself into a nearby chair, stunned by the realization. Fate had done something no business strategy could ever accomplish. Before either of them knew who the other was supposed to be, they had already met as ordinary people. No introductions. No expectations. No family pressure. Just a man with an umbrella and a woman trying to get through a difficult night. Footsteps approached. Damien looked up to find Janelle returning from the hallway. She immediately noticed the folder in his hands. Concern crossed her face. "Did something happen?" she asked. Damien hesitated. Then he held up the document. The moment her eyes landed on the page, understanding appeared instantly. Her expression froze. Neither spoke. Neither moved. The hospital noise faded into the background. Finally, Janelle sat down slowly. "You know," she whispered. Damien nodded. "You were the person I was supposed to meet that night." A small laugh escaped her, equal parts disbelief and exhaustion. "I never made it." She looked down at her hands. "My grandmother collapsed that afternoon. Everything happened so fast. I forgot about the dinner completely." Damien leaned back, still processing the impossible coincidence. For weeks, he had searched for meaning behind their repeated encounters. Now he understood. The meeting everyone had carefully arranged never happened. Yet somehow, they had found each other anyway. And neither of them knew what to do with that truth. Neither Damien nor Janelle spoke much after that conversation. Some truths were too large to process immediately. They sat together in the quiet waiting area while evening sunlight faded beyond the hospital windows. The city continued moving outside, unaware that two lives had just been rearranged by a discovery neither could have predicted. Over the following weeks, Janelle's grandmother grew stronger. Physical therapy sessions replaced emergency consultations. Worry slowly gave way to cautious optimism. For the first time in months, Janelle began allowing herself to imagine a future beyond hospital hallways and medical updates. Through it all, Damien remained present. Not because anyone expected him to be. Not because obligation demanded it. He simply showed up. Sometimes with coffee. Sometimes with groceries. Sometimes with nothing more than a quiet conversation that made difficult days feel lighter. The more time they spent together, the more Janelle realized that the reserved man she first met beneath a storm carried far more kindness than most people ever saw. And Damien discovered something equally important. The qualities that first drew his attention were not exceptions. They were who Janelle truly was. Her compassion was real. Her strength was real. Her dignity was real. One Saturday afternoon, Nearly 3 months after their first meeting, Damien asked Janelle to meet him somewhere. He offered no explanation, only an address and a time. Curious, she agreed. When she arrived, she immediately recognized the location. It was the same bus stop where they had first crossed paths. The shelter had been repaired. The weather was clear. Sunlight reflected off nearby buildings instead of rainwater. Damien stood waiting with his hands in his coat pockets. When she approached, he smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind that appeared rarely and only when he forgot to guard himself. "You brought me here on purpose," Janelle said. "I did." She looked around and laughed softly. "Why?" Damien glanced toward the street where cars rolled past. "Because this is where everything changed." The answer caught her off guard. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Damien took a slow breath. In business, he always knew what to say. Numbers were easy. Negotiations were easy. This felt entirely different. That night, "I thought I was on my way to meet someone important," he said. "I had no idea I already had." Janelle lowered her eyes, unable to hide her smile. Damien continued. "The dinner never happened. The plans never worked. Every arrangement failed." He paused. "And somehow that turned out to be the best thing that could have happened." The afternoon breeze moved gently through the street. People passed without paying attention. The moment belonged only to them. "So what happens now?" Janelle asked quietly. Damien looked at her with complete honesty. "Now I would like to take you on an actual first date." Her laughter filled the air. Warm, bright, unforced. The same sound that had first surprised him beneath the rain. "You know," she said, "most people usually ask that before months of hospital visits. I am learning. Very slowly. Probably." She shook her head, smiling. "Then yes." The answer was simple, yet it felt more meaningful than any carefully planned arrangement ever could. As they walked away together, neither knew exactly what the future would bring. Life rarely offered guarantees. But sometimes fate had a way of placing the right people in the same story at exactly the right moment. A canceled dinner, a stormy night, a shared umbrella, small moments that changed everything. And perhaps that is why the most important meetings in life are often the ones we never planned for. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about kindness, hope, and the unexpected ways life brings people together.